She spoke the horse's name like it belonged to her, like it had always belonged to her. And Ethan Calloway felt something inside his chest pull tight in a way the desert wind never could. The sun hung low over the Arizona flats, turning dust into gold, and his stallion shifted beneath him, ears twitching at the sound of its name carried on a voice it had never heard before. "Easy, Dust," the woman said softly, standing no more than 20 feet away, her posture calm, her dark eyes steady, as if she had every right to be there, as if she had been waiting. Ethan didn't move. His hand stayed loose near the reins, not reaching for anything, not yet. Out here, sudden moves meant trouble. But this wasn't trouble. This was something worse. Something that didn't make sense. Dust snorted once, then stepped forward on its own, slow and certain, like it recognized her. That was the part that hit hardest. Not the name, not the voice, the way the horse chose her. Ethan swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the ground with a soft crunch of gravel, his eyes never leaving hers. She wore a simple dress stitched from earth-toned fabric, nothing flashy, nothing meant to stand out, but the way she held herself made the land feel like it bent around her. There was a thin silver chain at her neck, something small catching the last light of day, but he couldn't make out what it was from this distance. Behind her, along the ridge, he could feel them before he saw them. Riders, still as fence posts. Watching, not threatening, not welcoming, just there. The kind of presence that said this wasn't his ground, no matter how far he'd ridden to get here. "You just called my horse by name," Ethan said, his voice low, steady, the kind of tone a man used when he wasn't sure if he was speaking to a stranger or a ghost. She tilted her head slightly, like the question wasn't strange at all. "He answered," she said. No apology, no hesitation. Just a simple truth laid out between them like it had always been there. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "That's because that is his name," he replied. "And I don't recall telling it to anyone." The wind picked up just enough to stir the hem of her dress, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and dry earth. She didn't step back, didn't step forward, just stood there, meeting his gaze with a calm that didn't belong to someone caught in a lie. "We've never met," she said. The words landed clean, too clean, like they had been practiced, or maybe repeated enough times to become something she believed. Ethan studied her face, searching for the flicker, the crack, the sign that she knew more than she was saying. There was something familiar in the shape of her eyes, the way she held her shoulders, the quiet strength that didn't need to be proven. But familiarity wasn't proof. Out here, faces blurred together over years of dust and distance. "Then you're either guessing," he said slowly, "or you're remembering something you shouldn't." Dust had reached her by then, lowering its head just enough for her to rest her hand against its neck. The horse didn't shy away, didn't pull back. It leaned in, just slightly, the way it only ever did with one person before. Ethan felt that same tight pull again, sharper now. The kind of feeling a man got when a door he'd nailed shut years ago creaked open on its own. Her fingers moved gently along the horse's mane, not hesitant, not curious, but knowing, like she'd done it 100 times before. "I'm not guessing," she said, almost to herself, her voice softer now, like the words were meant for the space between her and the animal. Then she looked back up at Ethan, and for the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not guilt, something quieter, something uncertain. "And I don't remember you," she added. The riders on the ridge remained still, silhouettes against the fading light, silent witnesses to something neither of them could explain. Ethan swallowed once, slow, his eyes drifting for just a second to the small glint at her throat. Silver, a stone set in it. Turquoise, maybe. The sight of it stirred something deep and distant, like a memory half buried under years of dust and choice. He looked back at her, really looked this time, and the thought came uninvited, unwelcome, and impossible to ignore. There are some things a man leaves behind on purpose, and some things that find their way back, whether he's ready or not. The silence stretched just long enough to feel like a test neither of them agreed to take, and Ethan Calloway had spent enough years on open land to know when silence carried more weight than words. He stepped closer, slow, measured, boots pressing into the dry ground with the kind of patience that came from knowing when not to rush a moment that could turn without warning. Dust stayed with her, unmoving except for the steady rise and fall of its breath, as if the horse had already decided where it belonged for now. That alone unsettled him more than anything she had said. "You do not remember me," Ethan repeated, not as a question, but as something he needed to hear again, to measure how it sounded the second time. Her gaze did not break, but there was a flicker now, something that passed through her eyes too quickly to name. "No," she said, quieter this time, as if the word carried more weight than before. The wind shifted again, brushing a strand of dark hair across her face, and she reached up without thinking, tucking it back in a motion so familiar it struck him harder than it should have. He had seen that gesture before. Not here. Not now. Somewhere else. Somewhere buried. Ethan exhaled slowly, his attention drifting again to the small piece of silver at her throat. The turquoise caught the fading light, just enough to send a sharp memory through him like a line pulled tight. He did not react outwardly. Men who survived out here learned early not to show when something mattered. "That necklace," he said, keeping his voice even. "Where did you get it?" Her hand moved instinctively to it, fingers closing around the stone as if protecting it from being seen. Not hiding it, protecting it. There was a difference. "It was given to me," she answered. No hesitation, but not the whole truth. He could hear that much. Ethan nodded once, slow. "By who?" She hesitated then, just a breath, just enough for him to catch it. "By someone who said it would help me find my way," she replied, and for the first time, her voice carried something softer, something that did not belong to the calm surface she had been holding. Ethan felt that same pull again, deeper now, like something inside him was trying to line up. Pieces that refused to fit. "Find your way back," he said, almost under his breath, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Her eyes sharpened at that, studying him now, not as a stranger, but as something that might hold an answer she did not expect. "Back to what?" she asked. Ethan did not answer right away. He let the question hang there, not because he did not know, but because saying it out loud would make it real in a way he was not ready to face. Behind her, one of the riders on the ridge shifted slightly, the faint sound of leather and saddle carrying across the distance. Not a threat, just a reminder. This was not a place where he controlled the pace of things. He looked past her for a brief second, counting shapes against the horizon, then brought his focus back to her. "You said we have never met," he said, stepping just a little closer, enough to close the space without crossing into it. "But my horse knows you, and that animal does not forget people." Dust flicked its ear at the sound of his voice, but did not move away from her hand. She glanced down at the horse, then back at Ethan, and for a moment, something uncertain passed across her face again, like she was standing at the edge of a thought she could not quite reach. "Maybe it remembers something I do not," she said. The honesty in that answer was different. It was not denial. It was something else. Something closer to confusion than certainty. Ethan studied her in silence. The lines of her face, the way she held herself, the quiet strength that felt earned rather than claimed. He had seen people lie. He had seen people pretend. This was neither. This was someone standing inside a gap they did not know how to cross. "What is your name?" he asked. "Ayana," she said. The name settled into the space between them like it belonged there. Ethan nodded once, almost to himself. "Ethan," he replied, though something told him the name would not mean anything to her. And it did not. Not in the way he expected. She did not react, did not search her memory, did not even pretend to recognize it. That was the part that confirmed it. Whatever tied them together was not something she could reach anymore. The wind moved again, softer now, carrying the distant scent of wood smoke from somewhere beyond the ridge. Evening was settling in, and with it came the quiet understanding that whatever this was, it was not going to resolve itself quickly. Ethan glanced once more at the turquoise stone in her hand, then back to her eyes. "You may not remember me," he said, his voice low, steady, "but something in this world does." He did not say more than that. He did not need to, because out here, the truth did not always arrive all at once. Sometimes it came the way the wind did. Slow, unseen, and impossible to stop once it started moving. The last light of day slipped lower, stretching shadows across the open ground until everything felt longer than it should have, like time itself was pulling thin between them, and Ethan Calloway knew that whatever was buried here was not going to stay buried much longer. He shifted his weight slightly, not stepping back, not stepping forward, just enough to break the stillness that had settled too comfortably around a question neither of them had answered. Ayana's fingers were still wrapped around the turquoise at her throat, her thumb moving across its surface in a slow, absent motion, as if her body remembered something her mind could not reach. That detail did not escape him. Out here, habits told the truth long before words did. "May I see it?" Ethan asked, his voice low, careful, like he was asking permission from something more than just her. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in thought, as if she was weighing something invisible. Behind her, the riders on the ridge remained quiet, but he could feel their attention sharpen, the kind of silent shift that meant every movement now mattered. She hesitated, just long enough to show that the necklace meant more than a simple gift, then slowly let her hand fall away from it. She did not remove it. She only allowed him to see it clearly. Ethan stepped closer, closing the distance to just a few feet, enough for the details to come into focus. The silver was worn smooth in places, like it had been handled often, and the turquoise stone held a thin fracture line running through its center, barely visible unless you knew where to look. His breath caught for just a second. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for him. "There is a crack," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Ayana followed his gaze, her brow tightening slightly. "It has always been there," she replied. Ethan shook his head once, slow. "No," he said, his voice steadier now, grounded in something he could finally hold on to. "It was not always there." The words settled between them, heavier than anything that had come before. Ayana's eyes lifted to meet his again, searching now, not for answers, but for confirmation that he was not simply guessing. "How would you know that?" she asked, and this time there was something different in her tone, something closer to urgency than calm. Ethan did not answer right away. He reached up slowly, stopping just short of touching the necklace, giving her the chance to pull away if she chose. She did not. His fingers hovered there, inches from the stone, like he was standing at the edge of a memory he had spent years trying not to revisit. "Because when I gave it," he said quietly, "it was whole." The air seemed to still around them, the kind of silence that did not belong to the land, but to the moment itself. Ayana's expression shifted again, something deeper this time, something that looked almost like recognition, but not quite strong enough to take hold. "You did not give this to me," she said, but the certainty from before was gone, replaced by something uncertain, something that did not sit right even with her. Ethan let his hand drop slowly back to his side, the weight of what he was saying settling into his chest with a quiet finality. "No," he agreed, his voice softer now, "not to you." That was the truth of it, and it landed harder than anything else. Ayana's gaze drifted for a moment, unfocused, like she was reaching for something just beyond her grasp. The wind carried a faint whisper across the open ground, and for a brief second, her fingers tightened around the necklace again, her breath catching in a way that mirrored his from moments before. "There is a river," she said suddenly, her voice distant, as if the words were not coming from this place, and the water was moving fast. Ethan did not move, did not speak. He knew better than to interrupt something like that. "I remember the sound," she continued, her eyes no longer on him, but somewhere far beyond, and a voice telling me to hold on. Her hand trembled slightly now, not with fear, but with the strain of pulling something forward that did not want to come. "And the stone," she added, her fingers pressing into the turquoise, "it broke." Ethan closed his eyes for just a second, the memory rising sharp and clear, not as something imagined, but as something lived. Cold water, a small hand slipping, the sound of stone striking rock. He opened his eyes again, steadying himself before the past could pull him too far back. "That is when it happened," he said quietly. Ayana looked at him again, really looked this time, as if seeing him for the first time not as a stranger, but as something connected to the memory she could not fully claim. "Then why do I not remember you?" she asked, and this time the question was not defensive. It was honest. Ethan held her gaze, the answer sitting heavy on his tongue, not because it was difficult to say, but because once spoken, it could not be taken back. He glanced briefly toward the ridge, toward the silent figures watching from a distance, then returned his focus to her. "Because," he said slowly, choosing each word with care, "something happened after that day that made forgetting easier than remembering." The wind moved again, stronger now, lifting dust into the air between them, blurring the edges of everything just enough to make the world feel uncertain. Ayana did not step back, did not look away. She stood there, holding on to a truth that was beginning to form without her permission. And Ethan realized then that this was not about proving anything to her. It was about waiting long enough for the truth to reach her on its own. The dust settled slowly between them, but the tension did not, and Ethan Calloway understood that some truths did not arrive all at once, but in pieces that cut deeper the closer they came together. Ayana stood unmoving, her hand still wrapped around the necklace, her breathing quieter now, but not steady, as if something inside her had shifted out of place and had not yet found where it belonged again. The memory she had spoken had not been complete, but it had been real, and that was enough to change everything. Ethan glanced toward the ridge again, measuring the still figures against the fading sky, then returned his attention to her, knowing he did not have much time before whatever silence protected this moment disappeared. There was more to that day, he said, his voice low, careful, like he was placing each word where it could not be taken back. Ayana did not respond immediately, but her eyes stayed on him, no longer guarded in the same way, no longer dismissing what stood in front of her. You were not alone, Ethan continued, watching closely for any sign that the words reached something deeper than memory. Her fingers tightened again around the turquoise, and for a moment, her gaze drifted past him, not to the ridge, not to the land, but somewhere inward. I see someone, she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, but I cannot see their face. Ethan felt the weight of that settle in his chest. Not absence, not denial, just distance. You do not need to see it yet, he replied quietly. You only need to know it was there. The wind shifted again, carrying a cooler edge now as evening took hold, and with it came a new sound, faint but unmistakable, the soft movement of a horse stepping down from the ridge. Ethan did not turn his head. He did not need to. The moment was changing whether he acknowledged it or not. Ayana seemed to feel it too, her posture straightening slightly, not in fear, but in awareness. Still, she did not step away from him. If you were there, she said, her voice steadier now, then why did you leave? The question landed differently than the others. Not accusing, not defensive, just searching. Ethan took a slow breath, his eyes lowering for just a second before returning to hers. I did not leave, he said. You did. The words hung there, quiet but undeniable. Ayana's brow tightened, confusion returning, but this time it carried weight, like something was pressing against the edges of her understanding. That does not make sense, she said. Ethan nodded once. No, he agreed, it does not. He took a step back then, not retreating, but giving space to what was unfolding, the way a man stepped. Back from a fire not to leave it, but to see it clearly. After the river, he continued, you were not the same. Ayana's hand dropped from the necklace, her fingers curling slightly at her side, as if she was trying to hold on to something that kept slipping through. Something changed, he said. Not in the land, not in the people, in you. The rider who had begun descending from the ridge was closer now, still not rushing, still not interrupting, but no longer distant enough to ignore. Ethan could hear the quiet rhythm of hooves against dry ground, steady and controlled. Ayana did not look back. Her focus stayed on him, as if whatever answer she was searching for could not be found anywhere else. Changed how, she asked. Ethan hesitated then, not because he did not know, but because the truth carried a weight he had carried alone for years. You stopped holding on to what came before, he said finally. Not all at once, but enough. Ayana shook her head slightly, not in rejection, but in disbelief, like the idea itself did not fit with who she believed herself to be. People do not just forget, she said. Ethan's expression softened, not with pity, but with understanding. Sometimes they do, he replied, when remembering would cost them more than they can carry. The words settled into her, not as an answer, but as something that demanded to be considered. Behind her, the approaching rider came to a stop, close enough now that Ethan could feel the presence without turning. The rest remained on the ridge, watching, waiting. Ayana finally glanced over her shoulder, acknowledging the shift, then looked back at Ethan, and something in her expression had changed again. Not confusion, not denial. Something closer to realization, though still incomplete. If what you are saying is true, she said slowly, then there is something I chose to leave behind. Ethan held her gaze, steady, unwavering. Yes, he said. Ayana's eyes dropped briefly to Dust, who still stood beside her, calm and certain in a way neither of them were. Her hand moved again, resting lightly against the horse's neck, and for a moment, her shoulders eased, like the contact grounded her in something real. Then she looked back up at Ethan, and this time, the question came differently. And you, she asked, what did you choose to keep? The wind passed between them again, quieter now, carrying the weight of everything that had not yet been said. Ethan did not answer right away. He did not need to, because some answers were not given in words. Some were carried in the way a man stayed standing when leaving would have been easier. The question lingered between them, quiet but heavy, and Ethan Calloway knew there was no easy way to answer it without unraveling something that had stayed buried for a long time. He shifted his stance slightly, the dry ground crunching under his boots, and let his gaze drift past Ayana for just a moment, toward the rider who had come down from the ridge and now waited within earshot, but outside the conversation. The man sat tall in the saddle, older, his presence steady and watchful, the kind of figure who did not interrupt unless it was necessary. Ethan recognized the authority in that stillness. This was not just a watcher. This was someone who decided when things ended. He returned his focus to Ayana, knowing the answer she had asked for was not something that could be softened. I kept the part that remembered, he said finally, his voice even, but lower than before, as if the words carried weight he did not intend to share with anyone else. Ayana studied him carefully, her expression no longer guarded, but searching, like she was trying to understand a language she had once known but forgotten how to speak. That does not seem fair, she said quietly. Ethan gave a small nod, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. It is not, he replied. Dust shifted slightly between them, the horse's presence grounding the space in a way neither of them could explain, its calm a contrast to the tension that had not left since the moment her voice first spoke its name. Ayana's hand moved again along the horse's neck, her fingers tracing the same path as before, slow and familiar, and Ethan watched that movement more than he watched her face. Because that was where the truth lived now, not in her words, in what her hands remembered. If I chose to forget, she said, her voice quieter now, more inward than before, then there must have been a reason. Ethan did not answer immediately. He let the silence hold for a moment, the way a man let a horse settle before asking it to move. There was, he said. Ayana lifted her eyes again, and this time there was no resistance in them, only a quiet readiness to hear what came next, even if she did not understand it yet. Then tell me, she said. The rider behind her shifted slightly in the saddle, a small movement, but enough to remind Ethan that this moment did not belong entirely to them. Time was narrowing. He could feel it. I cannot tell you everything, Ethan said, his voice steady, not apologizing, not hesitating, just stating what was true. Ayana's brow tightened slightly. Why not? Ethan held her gaze, unflinching. Because some of it is not mine to give back, he said. The answer did not satisfy her, but it did not push her away either. It simply added another layer to something already too complex to hold in one thought. She looked down briefly, her fingers tightening once more around the turquoise, then loosening again, as if the stone itself carried more than she understood. Then tell me what is yours, she said. Ethan took a slow breath, his eyes shifting once more toward the horizon, where the last light was fading into the kind of darkness that came quickly in open land. You trusted me, he said. The words were simple, but they landed with a quiet finality. Ayana did not react immediately, but something in her posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, like the truth of that statement found a place inside her even if she could not explain why. And I failed that trust, Ethan added, his voice softer now, not heavy with guilt, but with something closer to acceptance. That was the first time the balance between them changed. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Ayana's eyes sharpened, not with suspicion, but with focus, as if she had just found the thread that connected everything she had been trying to understand. You said I left, she said slowly. But now you say you failed me. Ethan nodded once. Both can be true. The wind moved again, cooler now, carrying the quiet weight of night settling over the land. The rider behind her finally spoke, his voice deep and measured, carrying authority without force. Ayana, he said, not calling her away, but reminding her of where she stood. She did not turn immediately. Her eyes stayed on Ethan, holding on to something that had not fully formed but was no longer distant. If I trusted you, she said, her voice steady now, then I would not have left without a reason. Ethan met her gaze, unwavering. No, he said, you would not have. Ayana took a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling with a quiet control that spoke of someone who had learned how to stand steady even when the ground beneath them shifted. Then whatever happened, she continued, it was not just about me forgetting. Ethan did not answer. He did not need to, because she was beginning to see it on her own. And that was the only way it would ever truly matter. Dust lifted its head slightly, the horse's gaze moving between them, as if it understood something neither of them could fully put into words. Ayana's hand rested against its neck, and for a moment, her eyes softened, not with recognition, but with something close to it. Then she looked back at Ethan, and this time, there was no denial left in her expression. Only a question that had finally found its shape. What happened after the river? She asked quietly. That made me choose to forget you. The wind passed through again, carrying the silence with it, and Ethan realized that this was the moment where the past stopped being something hidden and started becoming something that could no longer stay buried. The question did not echo, but it settled, heavy and final, and Ethan Calloway understood there was no stepping around it now, no quiet way to let the past remain where it had been left. The wind moved low across the ground, carrying dust in thin lines that curled around their boots, and for a moment, everything felt still in a way that did not belong to the land, but to what was about to be said. Ethan looked at Ayana, really looked, not at the woman standing before him, but at the distance in her eyes, the space where something should have been and was not. After the river, he said slowly, his voice steady but quieter than before, you did not wake up the same. Ayana did not move, did not speak, but her focus sharpened, like every part of her was listening now. You knew your name. He continued. You knew how to walk, how to speak. But the rest, he let the sentence fall away, because there was no simple way to describe something like that. Ayana's fingers curled slightly at her side, her breathing controlled, but no longer calm. The rest what? She asked. Ethan held her gaze. The rest was gone. The words landed clean. No force, no drama, just truth. Ayana's expression did not break, but something in her eyes shifted, something deeper than confusion, something closer to the edge of understanding. That does not happen, she said quietly. Ethan gave a small nod. No, he agreed. It does not. Not without a reason. The rider behind her remained still, but the weight of his presence had changed. Not interrupting, not stopping, just listening now. Ayana's gaze dropped briefly, her hand rising again to the turquoise at her throat, her thumb pressing into the crack as if she could feel something through it. And you were there, she said. It was not a question. Ethan nodded once. I was there when you opened your eyes, he said. And you looked at me like I was someone you had never seen before. The wind passed through again, softer now, carrying the first hint of night air, and Ayana's shoulders rose slightly with a slow breath. So I forgot you, she said. Ethan did not answer right away. He let the silence hold, because what came next mattered more than everything before it. No, he said finally. You did not just forget me. Ayana's eyes lifted again, searching, steady now, no longer resisting what was unfolding. Then what? She asked. Ethan's gaze shifted for a brief moment toward the ridge, then back to her, as if measuring how much truth the moment could carry. You chose not to remember, he said. The words changed everything. Ayana's brow tightened, not in denial, but in something deeper, something that recognized the weight of that distinction even if she did not understand it yet. That is not the same, she said quietly. No, Ethan replied. It is not. He took a slow breath, the memory settling into place with a clarity he had avoided for years. There were people with you, he said. From your tribe. They found us not long after. Ayana's posture shifted slightly, the mention of them grounding her in something familiar, something present. They saw what happened, Ethan continued. They saw you wake up without the past you had before. He paused, not because he did not know what came next, but because saying it meant placing a line between what was and what could never be again. And they gave you a choice. Ayana's eyes did not leave his. What choice? She asked. Ethan met her gaze fully now, no hesitation left. To rebuild your life with what you had left, he said, or to try and hold on to something that was already broken. The wind carried the words away almost as soon as they were spoken, but their weight remained. Ayana's hand tightened again around the turquoise, her breath catching just slightly, not in fear, but in recognition of something that felt true in a way she could not explain. And I chose to let it go, she said. It was not a question. Ethan shook his head slowly. You chose to start again, he said, without anything that could pull you back into what you could not fully remember. Ayana's eyes closed for just a moment, her head lowering slightly, as if the shape of that decision was forming somewhere deep inside her. When she opened them again, the confusion was still there, but it was no longer the only thing. There was something else now, something steadier. Then where do you fit into that? She asked. Ethan did not look away. I do not, he said simply. The truth of it settled in the space between them, quiet and undeniable. Ayana studied him, not as a stranger anymore, but as something more complicated than a memory she had lost. And yet you are here, she said. Ethan gave a faint nod. Yes. The rider behind her finally shifted again, the sound of leather and reins marking the movement. But still he did not interrupt. Ayana glanced back briefly, acknowledging him, then returned her attention to Ethan. If I chose to begin again, she said slowly, then why does this feel like something I did not finish? The question lingered, not demanding an answer, but revealing something she was beginning to understand on her own. Ethan watched her, the weight of years settling into a single moment, and realized that the past had not returned to claim her. It had returned to be acknowledged. And that was something neither of them could walk away from unchanged. The night settled in slow, not all at once, but in layers that dimmed the edges of the world until only what stood between them remained clear, and Ethan Calloway knew that what Ayana had just said was not a question meant to be answered, but a truth beginning to find its shape. He stood still, hands loose at his sides, the weight of the past no longer something he carried alone, but something that now stood between them, waiting to be understood. Ayana's gaze did not leave him, but it had changed, no longer searching for proof, no longer resisting what she felt, but trying to understand why something unfinished still held on to her when she had chosen to let it go. Dust shifted slightly, stepping just enough to stand between them for a moment, its presence quiet but deliberate, as if the horse itself refused to belong entirely to one side or the other. Ayana's hand remained on its neck, her fingers resting there with a familiarity that had never left her, even when everything else had. If I began again, she said slowly, her voice steady but softer now, then something must have been left behind unfinished. Ethan gave a small nod, not because she needed confirmation, but because denying it would serve no one. Yes, he said. The word was simple, but it carried everything that had not yet been spoken. Ayana took a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling with quiet control, and for a moment, she closed her eyes, not in retreat, but in focus, as if she was trying to listen to something deeper than memory. The wind moved across the land, carrying the faint sound of distant movement from the ridge, but neither of them turned toward it. This moment did not belong to the watchers. It belonged to what had been left unsaid. Then tell me what I could not finish, she said. Ethan did not answer right away. He looked at her, not as someone who had forgotten, but as someone who had chosen to survive, and there was no blame in that. Only a quiet understanding that some choices were made not because they were right, but because they were necessary. You were trying to go somewhere, he said finally. Ayana's brow tightened slightly. Where? Ethan's gaze drifted briefly toward the horizon. Where? The last line of light had disappeared, leaving only the deepening blue of night. Away, he said. The answer was not enough, but it was true. Ayana's eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in focus, as if she was trying to pull more from a word that held too much to be simple. Away from what? She asked. Ethan held her gaze. From something you could not stay with anymore. The words settled into her, not as an explanation, but as something that felt right in a way she could not yet explain. Her hand tightened slightly against Dust's neck, and the horse responded with a quiet shift, grounding her again. And you were taking me there, she said. It was not a guess. It was something closer to knowing. Ethan nodded once. I was trying to, he said. Ayana's breathing changed, just slightly, enough for him to notice, Enough to tell him that whatever came next mattered more than anything that had come before. Trying, she repeated. What stopped you? Ethan exhaled slowly, the memory rising again, not sharp, not painful, but steady, like something he had accepted long ago but never spoken aloud. You did, he said. Ayana's eyes widened just a fraction, not in shock, but in the quiet recognition that something important had just shifted. I chose to stop, she said. Ethan shook his head gently. No, he replied. You chose to stay. The difference mattered. And she felt it. Ayana's gaze dropped for a moment, her fingers tightening around the turquoise as if the stone itself held the answer she could not fully reach. Then I did not leave everything behind, she said slowly. No, Ethan answered. You left one path for another. The wind moved again, softer now, carrying the quiet stillness of the land at night. And for a moment, everything felt balanced on the edge of something neither of them could yet name. Ayana lifted her eyes again, and this time, there was no confusion left in them, only a quiet clarity that had not been there before. Then you were not the part one chose to forget, she said. Ethan held her gaze, steady and calm. No, he said. Ayana studied him, the weight of that truth settling into place, and for the first time, there was something like understanding in her expression, not complete, not finished, but real. Then why? Do I not remember you? She asked, but this time the question was different. Not searching for an answer, searching for meaning. Ethan did not look away. Because I was not the part you needed to carry forward, he said. The words landed quietly, but they carried more weight than anything else he had said. Ayana's breath caught just slightly, her hand falling from the necklace to rest once more against dust, as if grounding herself in something real while everything else shifted. The rider behind her finally stepped forward, just enough to be seen clearly now, his presence calm but firm, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that did not need to be raised. Ayana, he said, not calling her away, but reminding her that the moment was not endless. She did not turn right away. Her eyes remained on Ethan, holding on to something that had not been there before. If I did not carry you forward, she said quietly, then why are you still here? The question lingered, not demanding, not accusing, but real. And Ethan realized then that this was no longer about what she had forgotten. It was about what had found its way back anyway. The question did not need an answer right away, and Ethan Calloway knew better than to rush something that had taken years to circle back to this moment. So he stood there in the quiet, letting the night settle deeper around them, letting the weight of her words find where they belonged. The air had cooled, carrying the faint scent of sage and distant wood smoke, and somewhere far off, a coyote called once, then fell silent, as if even the land understood that something was unfolding that should not be interrupted. Ayana's eyes remained on him, steady now, no longer searching for fragments of memory, but holding on to something that felt present, something that did not need to be remembered to exist. Dust shifted again, stepping slightly to the side, no longer standing between them, but not choosing either direction, just waiting, as if the horse understood that this was not a moment of movement, but of truth. Ethan let out a slow breath, his gaze lowering for just a second before returning to hers. Because I never left, he said. The words were quiet, but they carried farther than anything else he had spoken. Ayana did not react immediately, but something in her expression softened, not with recognition, but with understanding that did not rely on memory. You said I chose another path, she said slowly. Yes, Ethan replied. Then you should not still be standing on it, she continued. Ethan gave a small nod, acknowledging the logic, but not the truth behind it. I am not, he said. I am standing where your path crossed mine. The distinction was subtle, but it mattered. Ayana studied him, the weight of that idea settling in, reshaping what she thought she understood. And you stayed there, she said. It was not a question. Ethan's gaze did not waver. Yes. The rider behind her shifted again, the faint creak of leather breaking the stillness. And this time he guided his horse a few steps closer, not enough to intrude, but enough to remind them both that time did not stand still, no matter how much the moment tried to hold it. Ayana glanced back briefly, meeting the man's eyes, and there was something unspoken in that exchange, something that passed between them without words. Then she turned back to Ethan, and whatever that silent understanding had been, it did not pull her away. If you stayed, she said, her voice quieter now, but stronger in a way it had not been before. Then you were waiting. Ethan did not deny it. Yes. Ayanna took a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling with quiet control, and for a moment, she looked down at the ground between them, as if measuring the distance not in steps, but in years. For what? She asked. Ethan's eyes softened, not with regret, not with hope, but with something steadier, something that did not depend on how this moment would end. Not for you to remember, he said. The answer came without hesitation. Ayanna's brow tightened slightly, the words not matching what she might have expected, and that was the point. Then for what? She asked again. Ethan met her gaze fully. For you to be who you became, he said. The wind moved through again, softer now, carrying the quiet weight of that truth across the space between them. Ayanna's expression changed, not in confusion, not in denial, but in something deeper, something that recognized the shape of that answer even if it did not fully understand it. That does not sound like waiting, she said. Ethan gave a faint shake of his head. It is not, he replied. It is letting go of what I wanted, so you could keep what you needed. The words settled into her slowly, not as something to accept or reject, but as something to feel. Her hand moved again to the turquoise, her fingers brushing over the crack, and this time, the motion was not uncertain. It was steady. And what did you want? She asked. Ethan did not look away. For you to remember me, he said simply. The honesty in that answer did not demand anything from her, did not ask her to feel something she did not try to change what had already been chosen. It just existed. Ayanna's eyes held his, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she nodded, once, slow, not in agreement, not in rejection, but in acknowledgement. And I did not, she said. Ethan gave a small nod. No, the rider behind her finally spoke again, his voice calm, but firmer now, carrying the weight of someone who understood when a moment had reached its end. Ayanna, he said, this time with intention, not just presence. She turned to him fully now, stepping back from Ethan just enough to create space where there had been none before. The shift was small, but it changed everything. The man on horseback studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod, not commanding, not questioning, just acknowledging that whatever needed to happen here had happened. Ayanna looked back at Ethan one last time, and this time, there was no confusion in her eyes, no searching, no uncertainty, just clarity. I do not remember you, she said quietly. Ethan held her gaze, steady, accepting. I know, he replied. She took a slow breath, her hand resting lightly against dust once more, and the horse responded with a soft shift, as if recognizing something had been resolved. But something in me recognizes that you stayed, she added. The words were not what he had expected, and that was why they mattered. Ethan did not speak. He did not need to, because some truths did not come back as memories. They came back as understanding, and sometimes that was enough. The space between them did not close again, and Ethan Calloway did not try to step back into it, because some distances, once understood, were not meant to be crossed a second time. The night had settled fully now. The sky stretched wide and dark above them, scattered with stars that did not move no matter how much everything else did, and the land carried that quiet stillness that came only when something had reached its end without needing to be forced. Ayanna stood a few steps away, her posture steady, her eyes no longer searching for anything beyond what was already in front of her, and in that stillness, there was no confusion left, no questions pressing forward, only a calm acceptance that did not need to be explained. Dust shifted once, then again, the horse's presence soft but certain, standing just off to the side as if it understood that whatever choice remained was not its own to make. Ethan rested his hand lightly against the saddle, not to hold on, not to prepare to leave, just to feel something solid beneath his fingers while everything else settled into place. Ayanna's gaze moved to the horse, her hand lifting once more to rest along its neck, her touch gentle, familiar, and this time, there was no hesitation in it at all. The connection remained, even without memory. That much was clear. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing, and when she looked back at Ethan, there was something different in her eyes, something that did not belong to the past, but to the present she had chosen. This is where it ends, she said quietly. The words were not heavy. They were not final in a way that closed something off. They were simply true. Ethan gave a small nod, his expression unchanged, steady, grounded in something that did not need more than that. "Yes," he said. "No more. No less." The rider behind her watched in silence, his presence no longer pressing, no longer waiting for interruption, but simply witnessing what had already been decided. Ayana's hand lingered against Dust for a moment longer, her fingers tracing the same line through the horse's mane, and then, slowly, she stepped back. Not abruptly, not as a rejection, just enough to let the space settle where it belonged. Dust lifted its head, ears flicking between them, uncertain for the first time, as if waiting for a signal that did not come. Ethan reached for the reins then, not pulling, not urging, just resting his hand there, offering the horse a choice without forcing it. Ayana watched that small movement, and something in her expression softened again, not with memory, but with understanding. "You are not asking it to come," she said. Ethan shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. "It already knows where it stands." The meaning was not lost on her. She glanced once more at the turquoise at her throat, her fingers brushing over the crack that had once marked the moment everything changed, and this time, there was no tension in that touch. Only acceptance. Then she lowered her hand, letting it rest at her side. The wind moved softly through the open land, carrying with it the quiet of everything that had been said without needing to be repeated. Dust shifted again, stepping once toward Ayana, then stopping, then turning its head slightly toward Ethan, caught between something it remembered and something it recognized now. The moment stretched, not with pressure, but with possibility. And then, slowly, the horse stepped back toward Ethan, not quickly, not decisively, but with a quiet certainty that did not need to be explained. Ayana watched, her expression unchanged, her eyes calm, steady, and when Dust settled beside Ethan once more, she gave a small nod, not of loss, not of relief, but of understanding. "It remembers you," she said. Ethan rested his hand gently along the horse's neck, his touch as familiar as it had always been. "It remembers what it was given," he replied. Ayana held his gaze for a moment longer, and then, without another word, she turned, not away from him, but toward the life she had chosen, toward the path that had not included him, and her steps were steady, unhurried, as if there was nothing left behind that needed to be carried forward. The rider fell in beside her without speaking, the two of them moving together toward the darkness beyond the ridge, their figures gradually blending into the night until they were no longer separate from it. Ethan did not call after her. He did not move to follow. He simply stood there, one hand resting on the reins, the other at his side, watching until there was nothing left to see but open land and quiet sky. Dust shifted beside him, letting out a slow breath, and Ethan exhaled with it, the tension that had carried him through the day finally easing into something still. He turned then, slow, deliberate, placing his foot in the stirrup and pulling himself back into the saddle with the ease of a man who knew exactly where he stood, even if the road ahead had not changed. The wind moved once more across the land, lifting Dust into the air, carrying it forward, and for a moment, it passed through the space where she had stood, leaving nothing behind but the understanding that some things were not meant to return as they were. They returned only long enough to be seen clearly, and then, just as quietly, they let go.